My ex tried to live alone on our lease after we broke up, so I made her life hell until she got out. This happened about 10 years ago. I had been dating this girl for about a year, and things were going pretty well. Both of our leases were coming up for renewal, and we decided to take the next step in our relationship and get a place together. We thought it would be a good way to save money and solidify things. I could really see myself with this girl, so we signed a year lease on a new apartment. For the first few months, everything was great. But then, as it often goes, things started to fall apart. I'm not assigning blame here, things just didn't work out. The tough part was that, as things started to sour, she began to get pretty nasty with me. After a few really ugly fights, I decided it was time to move out. I found a cheap place across town and packed up in a hurry. I moved out on a Saturday because I just couldn't stand it anymore. For the first week, I cooled off and figured I should talk to her about getting a new roommate and having my name taken off the lease. I called her and explained the situation. I asked her to get someone else to move in, but she refused, saying she couldn't afford the apartment on her own and didn't have time to find a new roommate. For the next 2 weeks, I worked to find a couple of mutual friends who were willing to move in. She rejected both of them for what I considered to be ridiculous reasons. Meanwhile, she hadn't lifted a finger to find anyone herself. At that point, it dawned on me, she was planning on living there alone for the next 8 months while I continued paying half the rent and utilities. I was not about to let that happen. My ex tried to live alone on our lease after we broke up, so I made her life hell until she got out. Part 2. I was pissed. Now I was paying for 2 places, 2 leases, 2 sets of utilities. While I wasn't in danger financially, I had some savings. I could not afford to keep paying for 2 apartments for much longer, and it just wasn't reasonable. To make matters worse, during our week of no contact, I found out that she had already started dating another guy. I know, it was super quick after the breakup, but I didn't have any evidence she cheated during our relationship, so I wasn't too upset by it. What did bother me was the fact that my ex was, well, insatiable. We had sex every morning without fail. Like clockwork, she'd have to leave for work by 8:45 a.m., so we'd always have sex around 7:45 a.m. This was one of the positive aspects of our relationship. She was really into it, and she was incredibly good at it. So, I hatched a plan. I figured if I couldn't get my name off the lease through normal means, I could at least make it difficult for her to live there in peace. The next morning, I showed up at her apartment at exactly 7:45 a.m. I parked my truck and waited until 7:50 a.m., knowing her schedule well enough to time it just right. I took the key, unlocked the door, and opened it as fast as possible. As I expected, my ex was in bed with this new guy. I made eye contact with him, and I'll never forget the shocked, maybe even a little ashamed, look on his face. My ex quickly pulled the covers over them, but I wasn't fazed. "Don't mind me," I said casually as I walked in. I went straight to the cupboard, grabbed the Lucky Charms I had left behind, and poured myself a bowl. I added some milk, sat down at the counter, and started eating, completely ignoring them. The guy couldn't move because his clothes weren't anywhere nearby. My ex started yelling at me to leave, but I just calmly continued eating my cereal. "Don't mind me," I said again. "I'm just on the lease. This is still my place." She was absolutely furious and started screaming at me, throwing a couple of shoes at me, missed, and having a full meltdown while I casually ate for about 15 minutes. Finally, I said, "Oh, look at the time. I've got to get to work." The guy didn't move an inch, and my ex was still fuming. I left, feeling pretty satisfied. My ex tried to live alone on our lease after we broke up, so I made her life hell until she got out. Part 3. The next day, I showed up at her place again. This time, I arrived a bit earlier, around 7:40 a.m., and as I walked in, they were both already awake and dressed. I put on my most cheerful face and said, "Good morning." I brought bagels, with a totally fake smile. I set the bag of bagels and cream cheese on the counter, saying, "I'm just going to grab a shower real quick." She didn't say much at first, but you could tell she was so pissed. She cursed me out, but this time, she stayed calm enough not to start screaming. She kept saying she was going to be gone by the time I got out of the shower. I made a bagel, ate it, and left the apartment after a short while. The next time I showed up was later that night, around 8 p.m. I knocked on the door, and when they opened it, they were sitting on the bed watching TV. I strolled in with some Chipotle, sat down at the counter, and started tearing into my burrito. "What are we watching tonight?" I asked, as if we were all the best of friends. "Oh, awesome, I haven't seen that show in years." "Cool." I stayed for about 30 minutes, chatting with them, asking annoying questions, and generally being a nuisance. The guy seemed super nervous and barely spoke, while my ex was seething. I left, thinking I'd gotten under her skin a bit more. My ex tried to live alone on our lease after we broke up, so I made her life hell until she got out. Part 4. On the third morning, I showed up at 7:45 a.m., but this time, no one was there. So, I helped myself to some cereal, took a shower, and left a polite note saying, "Sorry I missed you. See you tonight." Later that day, at work, I got a bunch of faxes from my ex. She was requesting my signature for a new lease, as well as signatures to cancel the power, water, cable, and internet bills. I took great pleasure in signing all of those forms and faxing them back. I never heard from her or her new boyfriend again after that.